So ng-conf is very special to me. This is actually where I was introduced to Sentry. So it's an honor to be presenting here and doing this workshop. And let's keep this interactive. So keep asking any questions. So I hope, as Anthony mentioned, you all cloned this down and got an npm installed. So we'll begin there, but I want to start with just some general information on the problem and what we're trying to solve, and then we'll delve into the technology and the how. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so what is Sentry? You can think of it as error and performance monitoring for all the different platforms. Today, we're here as Angular developers or JavaScript developers, so I'm going to be focusing on that. But at the core of it, Sentry is going to tell you, the developer, that your application is broken and or it's slow, and point you in the direction, the right code, the commit, whatever caused it, give you all the context around it so that you can fix it. So I'll be taking two approaches here. I'm going to go ahead and demo an application without Sentry, an Angular app, and talk about how we would debug that. And then we'll go ahead and talk about what it looks like with Sentry. And then in the bulk of this, we'll focus implementing this in Angular, going through it step by step, which will include introducing the SDK in, getting the source maps up, and I'll explain all of this step by step in depth. And as mentioned, ask questions. So even if you don't know what source maps are or anything like that, I'll explain to the best of my ability. And we'll go from there. But I'm sure other folks have quite a bit to say about this subject as well as JavaScript developers. But back to the slide content here. So what Sentry is application error and performance monitoring for all of these different platforms. And what we want to do is tell developers that their application is broken or slow, when it is, if it is, and give them all the details around it. So if you're not using Sentry on an Angular application, you might find yourself looking at the log and then trying to reproduce an issue. You then try to figure out what went wrong by looking at the preceding statements in the log. Let's say, hypothetically here, we're debugging that type error document not active, the second to last entry in the screen. You can actually, as an obfuscated stack trace, it really doesn't mean much to us. And we end up putting in debug statements, having to reproduce, having to gather more and more detail and peel back this onion and then figuring it out. At the core of it, we also don't even know how many folks this is impacting and some of the larger level data and relevant stuff around this. So let's go ahead and showcase what this would potentially kind of look like in an Angular app, and then we'll go in from there. So I have my application deployed right here. Here we go. So I'm going to pull up the console, and let's just say we're having some errors. So if I wasn't using Sentry, I would have to debug with this and go from there. And you can see clicking into this would take me into some inactionable code, and it's not really the TypeScript or whatever I'm writing in, as well as I don't know exactly what's going on, what happened before this, and so forth. So let's see what it would look like with Sentry. So here I'm going to demo it for a non-Angular stack just to make my point, because we're going to integrate this into Angular. But here, there's an error. I'm using Sentry, so what's going to happen is now automatically I'm going to be notified of this in just a moment. There we go. I can take some action on it. If not, get into the platform and then see all the context. And I'm going to show this real quick because we're going to go over this in depth for an Angular stack. But here I can see how many times it happened, how many users it impacted, the stack trace getting back to the original actionable code. All the details around what happened, all this other rich information, even the commit that caused this. So we're going to go ahead and wire this all up over the next couple hours. And as Anthony mentioned, there's going to be quite a bit of wiring up we're going to do, but we'll take breaks probably around every 40 minutes. I'll try to stay true to that. All right, so let's get started here. First thing, so I'm going to go ahead and keep referring back to the README so I can stay on the same page as y'all. So I think someone mentioned what version of NVM we're using. I put an NVM RC file here to help with that. So if you have NVM, just do NVM use and go from there. So fork it and clone it, npm install, and then I have a deploy target in the package.json, which is basically creating the build, the minified package, and then running that server. So all the artifacts of the minified package and running a server against that. It'll load up on localhost default 5000 by default, but you can see as mine was, I had something on 5000, it ran on something else. So hopefully everyone is here at this point and also has the code up in an editor, and then we'll go from there. So let's then go to sentry.io, sign up and create an account. I'm going to be doing this in an incognito window. So I'll be trying to emulate more or less a brand new fresh user coming into the platform, which may be most of y'all. All right, account is created here. So what I'm going to do is just actually go through this onboarding, but if you want to go through the raw documentation here, you can just go into here, search Angular, and go ahead and follow these directions here, or go into JavaScript, which will then prompt you into Angular here. And this is what you're going to be interested in right here specifically. So this is what we're going to do. Not going to steal away my own thunder, but I'll go ahead and post this in the chat as well. So, all curious, I believe it's also linked in the README. So here I'm going to go ahead and select I'm ready, and we're dealing with an Angular application here. So let's go ahead and select that, create that project. And now we're going to go ahead, be presented with some onboarding instructions. And you can see it's waiting for a verification event. So let's go ahead, get this all wired up. And then hopefully this turns green, and we'll go ahead and evaluate the data and go from there. All right. So here, what I'm going to do is go ahead and install the packages. I'm using npm here, so I'm going to go in right here. Sorry about that. Dog barking in the background. So keep moving on. Here we go. So what we've done here is we've installed the Angular SDK and our tracing SDK. So our tracing SDK is we're going to implement on top of the Angular SDK, which I'll show you momentarily. And what the Angular SDK is going to do is hook onto any global error handlers. We're actually going to hook onto, you'll see in a moment, Angular's error handler as a provider, and then ship up there and then provide you a way to get errors and exceptions up to Sentry. So what the model is here, and this helps picture it a little bit, is that we have an SDK sitting inside of your Angular application, and anytime any errors happen, anytime any stuff that you want to know about in regards to performance, it'll basically shoot up events into our event ingestion engine, Sentry. As part of that, you're going to be alerted as necessary. So when things are wrong, or when things are slow, or when things are broken, and you can create these alerts however you want. So very open-ended alerting system in there. And what that's supposed to do is notify your team, letting you know if something is wrong, and probably you should stop playing badminton or doing whatever it was that you're doing, writing code, and address this and investigate. So at that point, you know something is wrong, and then can go into our platform, which you kind of saw a sneak peek of, to investigate the rich context, figure out who this is impacting, figure out what went wrong, and the commit that caused this, assigning to the individual who's best equipped to fight this fire, who can roll forward in the shortest amount of time. So the goal here is, one, we want to surface errors, we want to surface problems, and we want to let the developers know that something is wrong, and then get them in the know, get them all of the relevant information, and back to badminton, or back to developing code or whatever it was that you're doing. So with that being said, let's go ahead and resume. Once again, we've installed the Sentry SDK, and now let's go ahead and get it configured. So we're going to head over to app module right over here, and I'm just going to And let's go ahead and instrument this code. So if I go ahead, I'm just going to do some tab management here. So let's go ahead and instrument this. So most importantly, we have right here first importing the packages. So let's get that done first. And then after that, I already have this taken care of. So I'm just going to go into here, go ahead and instantiate the SDK. So let's go step by step what's happening here. So Sentry, we've imported the SDK, we're initializing it. The DSN is going to be the unique key associated with your project. So here is the key, and we want errors to be shot up to sentry.io, and here is the project ID. And additionally, as I mentioned, we're going to have a tracing integration to help us surface those transactions and figure out those slowdowns, and we're going to go ahead and link this all. So this is the setup that we need to surface errors and transactions. And at the end here, just for demo purposes, I'm sending up 100% of transactions, but we can do this with whatever we want. So let's go ahead and visit this here. And then second step is that we want to hook onto Angular's error handler and make sure that we're surfacing errors as expected in this framework. So here what we're going to do is just overwrite all of the providers here, since I have a base Angular app and I don't have anything else here. There we go. And if we look here, it looks like we're creating an error handler, and Sentry is helping us with that here. And show dialog is that crash dialog I'm showing. You can turn that to false if you don't want it, but that's to enable user feedback to be attached to your issue so that you understand potentially what the user was trying to do, or any additional color depending on if you want their input. That can be turned off. And here is the setup for the tracing. And we want this all on initialization and specify it accordingly as well. So we're done here, actually. So let's go ahead and create a build and go from there. So let's refer once again back to our instructions. After we're done all of this, we're going to go ahead and run an npm run deploy. You know what? Let's clear this up a little bit. There we go. And if we want to just look at our changes, all we've done so far is add up the packages, put in the Sentry instrumentation, and that's it right now. And here we go, we're building again. So we'll just go ahead and wait till that happens. And then we'll go ahead to our application, trigger those errors, and see if anything was sent up. And we should then see a change in color here, change in state, and go from there. It's building right now. Probably if you guys want to take a second to check your emails, probably a good time. Oh, there we go, done building. Fantastic. And here, let's go into here, trigger up some errors. There we go, that's the dialog I was talking about. Yeah, so the question is, an app must be built and deployed to run Sentry. So you can run it in dev mode and stuff, but dev mode does some funny things, and the errors will be shot up, and you'll see them. But where you're going to get a lot of value out of Sentry is where you don't have access to the console or have access to that data. So it's running on the client's devices. So it might be in your production environment, your QA environment, and so that's where your application is going to be built and deployed, and that's where Sentry is going to surface these errors. But basically, Sentry is living in the app, surfacing errors in any of these environments. Yep, so let's go ahead and check in here. Oh, looks like an event was received, so let's go ahead, take me to my event. I'm just gonna go ahead and zoom in here. So it's gonna give us a product tour. I'm just gonna go ahead and click through that, and I'll go ahead and explain all of this as well. So we see the error type, error message, how many times it happened, how many users were impacted. We can even create some ownership rules. As you see, there's the tags and the breakdowns here, and this will help us understand who this is impacting. So if this was coming from all other browsers, we would be able to address that there. What endpoints, what environment, as well as what release this is coming from, which will get wired in as well. But basically, any tags introduced into our system produce a heat map. We'll see the stack trace. And most importantly, and we'll address this in a moment, is that this is still minified. So while this is in a nicer state than we saw before, it's still not exactly where we want it. So we'll go ahead and get that addressed and wired up. And here underneath, we have breadcrumbs so we can see what was happening prior to hitting the error. So some items, some things were clicked, and then an error happened. We can even see some preceding things in the console and any other information that might be relevant to the developer. Our SDK will go ahead and surface. And we can custom attach onto anything, any of this as well, which I'll cover in a moment. So let's just take a quick look here. Oh, it looks like it's trying to fetch some things actually because it tried to optimistically source map this, but I'm running locally and it wasn't able to grab onto the source maps. But better yet, we want to upload the source maps to Sentry, so upon ingestion, it'll get applied. So we'll get there in just a moment. But just to recap now, what we've done so far, right, is, and I actually got an email just right now saying, hey, I got a new error on a new project. But what we've done so far is we've introduced the SDK into our Angular app. Errors are being shot up, and now we're at the point where we know about our errors and we're getting alerted and we have access to this, and we can kind of go and investigate it. The stack trace is not as actionable as we want, but we will get there. But errors are going to be aggregated, and we'll know. Oh, how does Sentry calculate how many users are impacted? Good question. So if you can specify user context using our SDK, so I'll show you in a bit. We can do set user, set email, and then by that point, it's unique on that data. Otherwise, it's by the unique IP addresses. So that's a default behavior unless you specify user context. Yep, no problem. And keep the questions coming. All right, so let's go into here. So next thing that we're going to do now, so let's actually go back into the steps here, is get releases wired up, because the release one on the SDK level, it's going to let us know that which version of our build, which version of our application is broken, right? Because that's something we want to know. We don't want to know that errors are happening in the last few days. We want to know that errors are happening in the last few days across this version or these two versions. Secondly, it's going to be the object within Sentry, which we'll use upon ingestion. We'll say, hey, an error has come in from this version. Are there any artifacts, source maps, upload to the release within Sentry that we can apply to this to get a clean stack trace? So first things first, let's go ahead and specify that in the SDK. We'll install the CLI tool that helps us upload this. And then I've already done this for y'all, but we just want to specify the setting into Angular, or the config into Angular to produce those source maps. And then we'll get them uploaded up into Sentry. And that's what the makefile is for. So we'll dive into that. But one step at a time, let's go ahead and specify the release here. So I've already done some wiring up of things here, which you'll see in a moment. So what I'm going to do here is go into app modules TS, go into the top over here, and just specify release. Oops. So I've already populated environment.release, I believe. So you guys can just piggyback off of that. There we go. Then we're going to install the source maps. Or install Sentry CLI. So let's go ahead and do that. And we're doing it as a dev dependency. I'm going to go ahead and highlight this in Angular JSON. So if we look at source map, here I've done source map true. There we go. And if we go ahead into makefile, I'll show you how. So when we run npm run deploy, it's actually calling out to the makefile. And I'm creating a release right here. So I have all of this stuff just populated into variables, just for easy calling. But creating a release on that version, and the version is basically the head, so it's going to be there right there. I'm also writing this out to env and such, so when I run npm run deploy, we'll go ahead and do all of that, and I'll commit my changes as well so we can step through this. All right, after we create the release object, we're going to go ahead and upload the source maps. So actually, let's go ahead and uncomment this out. And then put this in. So set up release, we'll call create release, and I'll upload source maps. And we're specifying the path to the source maps. And saying Sentry CLI releases upload source maps. So here in dist, we're going to have the source map. So if we go ahead and look into here, dist, you can see the .js and the .map. So these are pretty big files that are one line. At the bottom, it has the source mapping URL, which points to which source map should be applied for that minified.js. So that's kind of how it works in a nutshell. So for those of you that are new to source maps, that's going to be how you get minified.js into your readable, actionable JS, your source code. So it's basically that mapping file. So let's go ahead and proceed and get this uploaded here. Oh, first we're going to have to create an auth token as well so that we can get these things uploaded. So let's actually do some more venturing around in Sentry. So I'm going to keep these instructions side by side. If we go to organization settings here, and then go to developer settings, let's go ahead and create a new internal integration. So here, organization settings, developer settings, new internal integration. And let's just say auth token. And we're going to have to specify some permissions here. So I've said release admin and organization read and write. Alrighty. And let's go ahead and save that. And once we save that, we're going to be given an auth token here, right over here. And let's go ahead and export that as an environment variable. So let's go into here. All right, go into here. There we go. All right. And now in the make file, we're going to go ahead and make those changes to point to this project as well. So here, if we go into our projects, you'll see the project we created and the name of it all. You can also jump into project settings right over here. You can see the name of the project. The name of the org is going to be my company one. And you can get that from organization settings as well. So I'm going to go in here, go into the make file. Here, my company one. And just to avoid any errors here, let's just copy paste. There we go. So we should be good over here. And just to make sure we're following instructions, we've done this. We've done this. This was done for us. We removed the placeholder setup release and called the one that's calling upload source maps. We've configured an auth token, created and configured. Set it as an environment variable. Made changes in our make file. And let's go ahead and run the build here. So I'm going to go ahead and also just commit this as well. Upload source maps. It has to just persist across the shell that we're using here. So for example, I have another auth token that I'm using for other things, but I'm just going to go ahead and use this session here. So I would export it because otherwise we're just going to have to keep specifying it into npm run deploy over and over again. So that's why I've done the export here, just so to avoid that. And it's going to be Sentry-auth token, I believe. Let me make sure I did do Sentry-auth token. Yeah, Sentry_auth token as well. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and commit this, which I did. All right, so git push master. Then we'll go ahead and run that build. So npm run deploy, I believe. Yep. There we go. You can see it's populating a environment.prod.ts, and that's how it's reading into environment. Oh, yes, I can definitely slow down a bit. I do understand I'm a little bit finicky. And just to get a poll, is everyone over here running npm run deploy, or are we still getting the make file configured? I'm happy to kind of highlight this section again, because this is honestly probably the trickiest part with uploading the source maps and making sure that we're tying all of this together by release. And we'll take a break right after this setting as well. All right, let's check on the build. Looks like we're here. And before we trigger out any errors, let's just verify that the source maps are uploaded here. Authentication credential errors only because, yes, export. Yeah, you're going to have to export that once again. Otherwise, you will get some 403 authentication type of error or something. All right, so what we're going to do is just hop over to Sentry. I'm just going to full screen this here. And let's go over to source maps right over here. Fantastic. We see the release, and we see the number of artifacts. So let's keep diving into here. And we see the minified.js and the source maps uploaded. Fantastic. And the paths need to match exactly the stack trace that we see in the minified one earlier. I've already done this for you and kind of wired this up through this whole makefile and some of these other commands. Oh, I can't start the polls in Zoom. Do you have the poll questions? Let me check. Sure. Oh, I do. Is it possible to combine state management tools like, yep, exactly. You can, I'm going to answer this live. You can grab onto the state. I'll show this actually a little bit later. The only thing that you want to be aware of is, like, if you're attaching the entire Redux state or something like that, or the NGRX state, we do have a 200 KB maximum. And we do some things on the SDK to do some like type of intelligent trimming or some things over there. But that's really the bottleneck here, is just to make sure. Oh, yeah, exactly. So in the SDK, I'll demo this as well a little bit later. Actually, let me just go ahead and showcase this in documentation. You can set tags in any custom context. So if we go to Angular over here, you can then go to getting started and then configuration. Enriching events, customizing tags. You would just do sentry.setTag or sentry.setContext, and you can specify the object, and it'll be attached onto the Sentry scope and then be surfaced with the Sentry errors as well and attached. Does that address the question, Thomas and Josh? Oh, another one. I got this from npm run deploy. Could dot determine release name. Please attach. Ash, did you git clone or did you put download by chance? You get the error project not found. And Kevin, just to make sure that all the things are correct, what you want to use for project name is this one right here. And what you want to use for the organization slug is this one right here. Yeah, so I think, Kevin, what may be failing is probably the Sentry CLI piece that's hitting against the project stuff. All right, I'm going to pause for a moment here. Got it. Kevin, I'll have to stick around later to check what's up there. If you can post the error message, that might help me a little bit as well. Did you, by chance as well, download this or clone it, Kevin? Or clone, okay. I don't know what's wrong at the moment. I'll have to check with you a bit later. Sorry about that. Alrighty. Thank you, Jay-Chan. Trying to help out here. All right, so let's, now that we've verified source maps are up, let's just go ahead and shoot up a couple different errors. So I'm just gonna go back into here. And I've actually done the user context thing as well, I believe, in the code. But here, I'm gonna go ahead and just shoot up some errors. And then what we should see is source mapped errors, hopefully. There we go. So let's go back into Sentry, go into issues over here, and we can let these roll in real time by clicking that plus. Go ahead and just dismiss that. And now here, I'm going to go ahead and just pull these up in a new tab. Fantastic. So you see it says source app component.typescript, and it's mapping right to these files, and it's showing us the correct call stack. And this is exactly where we would want to see. And we can drill down into any of these and go forever. So this versus that is basically the difference here. And now I'm going to go ahead and just shoot up a few more. And I'll show you what's going to happen in a bit. All right. So if we go into here now, we should start seeing more roll in. And now they're going to be aggregated properly as well. So we use the stack trace attributes to aggregate this. Not everything, but we do a bunch of detection and heuristics on what is likely going to detect similar errors and be resemblant of that, and go ahead to use that and group these accordingly. So here we can see it's coming from right here, as to events coming from more or less the same IP addresses and the same attributes. It's not an interesting data set here, but we'll show an interesting one later. So we're hitting the 40-minute mark here. I think it's a good time to take a break, and I'm going to take a look at the questions during those breaks as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just pause my screen here on where we are in terms of an actionable stack trace, and then side by side, I'll go ahead and pull in exactly where we were here. And hopefully most of you were able to keep along here. All right, let's do how about a 5-minute break? All right, see you guys. Let's at the 45 mark here. All right, so hopefully we're all seeing TypeScript stack traces and not minified stack traces. And you'll see some other things as well, which we'll address here as well later. So next, we're going to go ahead and look at a different data type. So here what we're looking at is a event type of a error. Let's go ahead and look at the performance data and see what we get out of the box here with an Angular app. So just to recap, what we've done here in app module TS is we've implemented and instantiated the Sentry SDK here. And we've also specified the tracing integration, and that's what we're going to take a look at here. So let's go ahead to performance. And since it's just a simple Angular app, we just have one type of transaction here, and we have a few of them. And you can see the throughput here, the P50 metrics, P95 metrics, failure rate. Looks like it succeeded every time. The user misery index as well. And I'll dive into some of these metrics later as they're explained. But you can go ahead and highlight over these tooltips here as you display any of these graphs, and go ahead and look into that data. You can also drill down by highlighting and selecting a sector as well. Go ahead and star any of your transactions. And let's go ahead and pull this up. Now here we're on the transaction summary page, and this is where we're going to see a lot of useful data. So here we have a duration breakdown. We can switch any of these graphs as necessary. We have a nice little trends thing as well that evens this out. But let's go ahead and look into the direction percentiles, the latency distribution, and we'll get into web vitals in a bit as well. And that's right, yeah, we're surfacing the Chrome Web Vital stuff to let you know when the content, the pane, and the interaction is prepared and ready. So here, if we go ahead and highlight any of these things, we can get some of those metrics, some of those drill downs. We show some of the slow transactions. We can filter through those. We'll go into one of those in just a moment. We can see the related issues. So this is actually where we're linking the errors into the performance problems. So you can investigate from there. On the right-hand side, just as we had with errors, there's going to be aggregate information. So app.dex score, web vitals, looks like we're doing an okay time. You can see those earlier metrics all graphed at the transaction aggregate level. And any of the tags introduced into the system will produce a summary and a heat map here as well. So let's go ahead and drill down into these slowdowns. And remember, this is just out of the box. So with the page load, we can see that there was an error. All of these things happened within the browser. So browser actions, all of these resources and artifacts were brought in. This is what happened in Angular browser land. You can even see the routing instrumentation that we hooked onto as well. So as a developer now, I would know where the time is being spent, what requests are going out, what's happening in my application, and going from there. I'll show you a more involved example of this that's actually looking into a backend where you can figure out some of the other information from there. But in regards to this transaction, I see exactly what happened in the page load and even the web vital information, where the time was being spent, and so forth, all just with the simple SDK import and instantiate here. Next, let's go over to Web Vitals. So this is a pretty simple app, but I can drill into the Web Vitals, and we have FP, first contentful paint. So this is provided by Google and crew over there, and we'll pull whatever we can from these browsers as expected. And you can drill down on this information as well. So that's a quick overview of performance. This has been used in many cases, but what we're trying to do is really give the front-end developer visibility into why their application is behaving the way it is, whether it's broken and it's slow, it's one or either. And we have the alerting engine to do this as well. So for example, if I wanted to create an alert here, I could open this up in Discover, which is our analytics engine, and create an alert accordingly as well. So for example, if we go into performance, go into this transaction, we could then view any of this data in Discover to then query it and set an alert accordingly as well. So one other thing, and I mentioned this because we're going to be using Discover later, is we'll go ahead and enable a trial. We can just do that now while we're here. So if we go to subscription, go to activate our trial, it'll give us access to all of those features so that we have Discover. And that's why we're not being able to go ahead, bam, open in Discover. And this is our analytics engine where we could then do any other querying or alerting. I'll get into alerting in just a moment in the tail part of it. But just wanted to address why we're going into these dashboards and looking into there. Mostly because this is our first time and we're onboarding into this, but wanted to give alerting a shout out as well. All right, so let's go ahead and address where we are once again. We headed over to performance. We drilled down on this transaction and viewed to distributed trace. So just to recap, performance here, we can see all this data, drill down, see the transaction summaries, the web vitals, the aggregate data on the right-hand side, any of the related issues in case we wanted to drill down into that. And now here we have the performance data on the right-hand side. There was an error associated with this. I can go ahead, directly pull that up, and the performance or the error data on the left-hand side. So let me go ahead, collapse this. Basically, this is why it was broken, and that's likely led to this slowdown. And as a developer, I have that information. All right, going into the README again. Now comes time for alerting. So we're going to set two different types of alerts. We're going to do an issue alert and a metric alert. The issue alert will be taking into the errors into account as they're being aggregated into issues, and then we want to know when these issues get to a certain condition, and we want to be alerted accordingly. Metric alerts are going to differ in that it's taking in the overall volume, and we can define in any query that we want and any thresholds that we want. And more or less, when that threshold is passed, will be escalated accordingly, and we can address that error. So let's go into the platform and go ahead and set some of these errors. We'll go ahead and configure the Slack integration as part of this as well. So here I am in Sentry. First thing, I'm going to actually go ahead and let's configure the Slack integration. So we have a laundry list of integrations. You can do whatever you want. I'm going to do Slack if you want to follow along with me. But the point being is PagerDuty, Slack, Microsoft Teams. You want to know about your errors and issues. So let's massage that into this project setting. For our first organization settings, let's go to integrations. Let's go to Slack. Whoop. That's not working right now. Well, I'll just go to alerting and cover that for now. So let's go bam, alerts. And anytime you're stuck in the product, you can actually just press Command-Shift-P or Command-K. That'll pop up in this little VS Code menu as well to help you get where you want. But if we go to alerts, then we go to view alert rules, and then create alert rule, it takes us into right here. So here we can give this a name. Let's say notify me on issue spikes, on error spike. Specify when you want this to occur. So let's just say that this is seen by 50, or it happens 50 times in an hour, and it affects 10 users within a day. And if that happens, go ahead and send an email to any of the individuals, the whole team. We can go ahead and configure that as necessary as well. And then you would also see any of the integration there as well. So here in a configured setup, let me just go ahead and kind of show you what that looks like. So if I go head over to alerts, we can view the alert rules for this project. And for example, here's a more fleshed out alert rule where I'm reading in some of the tag attributes. So we were talking about custom context earlier. We can go ahead and read in any of that and then escalate to PagerDuty, escalate into Slack, and go from there as necessary. The second type of alert rule that we have is a metric alert. So if we go into here, I'll just show this in my other experience once again. We go into alert here, we do create alert. Issue alert is what we were talking about, where it's based on an error that's being aggregated into an issue. And with a metric alert, we can read in any of the data and where there's errors or transactions, create any type of query for it. So I was custom tagging my things with Enterprise. We can drill down into this data and then set a threshold accordingly as well. And any actions. So we want this to go to Slack, for example. And we can go ahead and save that as well. And this is what you would use for the transaction as well. So the only difference is you're going to have this being aggregated. You can read in any of the performance metrics into this as well. So the duration as well as the web vital information as well. And then set a alert accordingly. So here, we'll say we want this to happen when it gets up here and resolve when it gets to 1.5 seconds. And what this is going to look like, and we saw this earlier, is an issue alert will come in. You'll see it looks something like this. And then metric alerts, when they resolve, they'll look something like this. And when they trigger, something like this here. All right. So let me just take 1 second just to see if I can get this sorted out here. It's going to take a 1 minute break here. All right, there we go. So I got this thing sorted out. So I've started the trial, and you all should as well, so that we can get some of these features. So let's go ahead, head over to organization settings, go to integrations. Let's see if we can get this configured. So let's go add workspace. Sentry-demos is mine. Go ahead, enter yours if you have that. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at that. Sentry-demo. All right. Just going to go ahead, click through, and then we should see it in just a moment. Oh, I guess I have to link in with that user. So I would have to add that to my email as well. So in case you're curious how to do that, it would be here, add it to email. All right, so I'm going to try one more time again. Oh. I'll have to figure that out later. Okay. That's it for alerting. We'll go ahead and actually move on to my interesting and favorite integration, which is our GitHub integration and our source code management integration. And this one is particularly interesting because once an error comes in, you want to know, well, obviously all the details around it, but eventually you start looking around in terms of what releases went out, what changes went out, what commits went out. And, you try to solve it if you're the best one equipped to fight that fire, you know something about that code base. But if you don't, it's about finding the change that causes, the person that knows something about it, and then being able to act on it from there so that we can reach a resolution in the fastest. So you might have seen earlier in some of my examples. So here, for example, when I pulled up some of these issues, they showed that the commit that it was caused from. I'm going to show you all how to wire that up. I've done some of this work, but what this looks like once it will be wired up is that you'll link in to the commit that likely causes error, have any of those assignees easily available here so that you can get this issue accounted for. So just to look in terms of the README, in terms of where we are, let's go on to the GitHub integration right here. So I'm going to go over here again to organization settings. back to integrations, GitHub, add installation. Just go ahead and click sign in. Alrighty. There we go. You can go ahead and select those repositories or click all and then save from there. I've already done it right here, so bam. And there we go. We're all set up. And then you should see your configuration over there as well once it's set up. Alrighty. And then if we go into the README again, let's go ahead and follow these other instructions here. So we're going to go ahead and associate those commits, and that's going to be done through the makefile. So let's go to VS Code here, in the makefile. So there's this associate commits command here. Let's go ahead and just add it to the chain of things. And it's using the same CLI tool and then calling set commits local. We can go ahead and switch this to auto. And it will go ahead and upload those commits. So let's just make sure we're all okay on over here. So I believe this was all done. All right. Now let's go ahead and run the build again. And just to highlight what's happening here, so we're calling npm run build, which is running, or npm run deploy, which is calling the pre-deploy. I'm doing just the creating the .env and populating the environment variable, and creating the minified bundle, and then we're calling make, and that's what's triggering that chain of actions that I was referring to earlier, and then hosting it up or loading it up. So here we go. Looks like we've associated commits, and in our example here, if we see this here, we'll go ahead and see success right here and go from there. Looks like I had some issues wiring this up, but it'll still work without a integration in place, which is very interesting because we just need the local Git information. And what we're doing is we're populating or coupling the change that information with the release information. So let's go ahead and see what all of this looks like here. So I'll go ahead and pick this screen. Now, when I go ahead and pull one of these up, oh, not the right one, sorry. You're going to need a good stack trace on that. So here we go. And we can see it identified the commit that causes error, and then we can easily assign to that individual. So it's easy as that to wire all of that up and get going right there. And it's not going to just tell you what's wrong in terms of the details regarding your application, but it's also going to tell you what's the commit that likely caused this, so we can get this triage and address and figure out to roll forward, roll backward, because that's the whole point of this, is that, you know, we want to play more badminton, we want to write more code and know about our issues and errors and get them addressed. So just to recap where we are in terms of the README, we did npm redeploy. You actually didn't have to shoot up any new errors, but if you pull up an error and issue, you should then see the suspect commit and suggested assignee. And we're good. So let's actually just kind of recap all of this in terms of what we've all done. So over the last hour and some odd minutes, we introduced the SDK, right? We did an npm install. We introduced the Angular SDK. We specified the proper configuration and app module. So that was a Sentry error handler and the tracing service as a provider, and then initialize the app accordingly so that any errors, any transactions upon the application being loaded is going to be sent up to Sentry, and you're going to have that visibility. So you can have that visibility in the form of alerts so that you're proactively notified and you know when there are any issues, whether there's code problems, errors, exceptions, or it's things slowing down, and then get the proper team notified. And then with that context that we're going to have from the Sentry SDK, since we're inside of the application, we can then address any of those problems. We get the information on the impact. We get the code level details in terms of what was going on, the stack trace, the breadcrumbs, the steps leading up to it, any of that aggregate information, so that we can look at the commit that caused this error to assign to the dev that knows something about it, and then roll forward, roll backward accordingly so that we can get back to a stable state and play badminton again. So that's pretty much it for a nutshell. Majority of this was focused on the SDK and getting that information up, and I highlighted some of the other integrations. The point with the integrations is go ahead and configure those as necessary, and you can hook into any of these source management tools, hook into any issue tracking tools, hook into any notification and incident tools as well as any data forwarding that you need to do, or enterprise SSO, etc. Last thing I do want to show you is when you are using Sentry cross-platform, that's where you're really going to get a lot of value, because we're working on a front end, but the front end is likely talking to a set of services on the back end, which it may or may not be a set of microservices. That's when you're going to get a lot more clarity. So here's an example where in an error where it's going between a front end and a back end, and bam, here's the front end side of things. And now I can go ahead and look at the stack trace and see that this is a 500. We didn't get a 200, so we threw an error. Looks like good error handling on the front end. I have all the details I need. I have all of the data, the commit that caused this, but that's not really, that's probably the commit that introduced good error handling. And now what I'm going to do is search by transaction ID across all of my projects. And now I figured out that this 500 error was actually due to this backend error. And it was a result of propagation in that sense. So here is the culprit, and this caused both of the errors. This is the commit that caused it. Now I'm in backend land, and I have all of the information I need. I can hop into any of these frames. Similarly, in the performance example, so if I have this piece right here, hitting a backend is trying to load up a tools, is the front end, is the backend that's slow. I want to know exactly what's going on. That's where this is really going to help as well. So one more example of using Sentry on the backend and front end. So if I go into here and then click checkout, the checkout is also slow and seems like it's broken as well. So let's go ahead and debug that. There you go. So if I was to delve into performance, pull up the front end experience here, tool store, go into here, I can see that 99% of the time was spent on this backend request. Delve into that. And there's also some web vital violations as well. I can see that is running the query that results in the slowdown. And similarly with checkout, do the same type of thing. See the error that was related on the front end. Go to the back end from here, all within a couple clicks. And now I can see what's going on at the front end and back end on the performance and transaction level. See exactly what's going on. Looks like it's for loop, try catch. Plenty of different things I can do to make this more performant. So that was just kind of a nutshell with a better data set. But to get back to the subject at hand. Hopefully you all were able to keep up with this. The most important part being introducing the SDK and surfacing those errors. We drilled down on two different event types, performance being one of them, and then errors or transactions and errors. And then we configured a couple different integrations to help us get notified whenever we want, wherever we want. And then look at the suspect commit. We also highlighted metric alerts versus issue alerts as well. Last thing that I do want to note is I did put this in a separate branch in case you got lost with the final code. So go ahead and poke into that if you need to. Otherwise, I'm always here for questions. We got plenty of time. Hopefully this gave you a good overview of Sentry, but at the core of it, application error monitoring for all the different platforms will also surface your performance problems as well in your front-end JavaScript applications and help you trace those into the appropriate calls, whether it's in that framework or any of the microservices downstream. And we want to hook into all of your appropriate places so that you can have a proper workflow oriented around this and have developers accountable for the code that we put out there and have the ability to address it. So lastly, this is just what I covered: error monitoring, performance monitoring. We're going to be releasing release health for JavaScript soon as well, which will help us get that denominator in the sense of percentages, so that we'll be able to tell you crash-free users, your release adoption, etc., and some of that stuff. Discover is the analytics engine, where that helps us query any of this data. So quick little guide into that. If you go into Discover, right over here, any of the data that you see here will be aggregated. So let's go ahead and look at this from a URL perspective, or we can build up a query. Something interesting, for example, that I like to do is like, what is my worst file name? And let's see, how many users were impacted by errors in this file name. We can basically iterate on this data however we want, getting to that and pivoting on this as necessary, and so forth. So shoot up your errors, shoot up your transactions in Sentry. We'll let you know when things are messed up. You'll have all the details. And you can also query any of this data as needed as well. So I showed you some of the bells and whistles here about getting wired up. Something that you're probably going to need to do after this is, after you get the data flowing in, there'll probably be a level of noise elimination. So we have filtering in the SDK and the server side to help you with that, as well as grouping. So that's all steps that come in after kind of getting this wired up. But getting the SDK installed, getting the source maps up, that's what's most important and critical. And then getting your developers in the know about these errors, and then being able to act on it, whether they're actionable or might be a Chrome extensions that's just messing with your app, because I am one of those Grammarly users or Honey users. So let me know if there's anything else that y'all want me to cover. But at the core of it, we put our code out there, especially when it comes to browser code. We don't know how it's behaving in these environments. Sentry is what gives you that visibility and provides you that context so that you can get those answers into what went wrong, how it went wrong, and all the in-app context that you would need, and even figure out the commit that costs us here. So that is actually it for me. I went a little bit faster than expected here. But go ahead, follow any of these links, and please feel free to write into me. My email is neil@sentry.io. Happy to help you get this wired up in Angular.